The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. This is the fourth in a series of 5 webinars on risk intelligence with our partner, NICER. My name is Matthew Darius. I'm the professional, I don't even remember my title here. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator here at SBO, and I'll be moderating today's call. Today's session is called Helping Others, 8 Essential Practices of the Risk Intelligent SBO. Again, today we have Jeff Marshall, who's the Special Projects Manager at the Public School Risk Institute, and we have Lee Gavey, who is the Executive Director of the New York Schools Insurance Reciprocal. If you're new to the webinar series, I'm just going to go over the ways you can participate. We've got 3 different methods. You can hit the raise hand button on your GoToWebinar control panel, which is typically somewhere on your screen, typically on the right. What that'll do is that'll notify me as the moderator that you have a question you'd like to ask over the phone. Everyone is muted by default, so when you hit that, I will interject into the presentation and unmute you, and you'll be able to talk to Lee or Jeff. You can also use your chat screen, your chat window. Go ahead and type any question you want in there. I'll be monitoring that the entire time, and I'll read off your question to our presenters, and they'll answer your question. Then there's also a question and answer pane as well on the side of your screen. That's more of a threaded messaging application where you can type in your question and any of the presenters can type back to you or they can answer you verbally. If anyone has any questions throughout the entire presentation about how to use GoToWebinar or about the content, feel free to use any of those methods to get a hold of Jeff, Lee, or I, and we'll be happy to answer your question. With that out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to Lee for our introduction.
Thank you, Matt. We're glad to be back together again. We sure missed you last session, Matt. Jacqueline did a fabulous job of coordinating and helping us with the technical part of this presentation, and we're grateful to have Jeff Marshall back. For those who are joining us for the first time, Jeff has a varied background that includes being a risk manager for the Philadelphia Public Schools. He is an attorney, has background with the state of New Jersey as their claims manager at one time, and has also been a mayor, so he is well-versed in sort of the lay of the land in terms of school and risk, and also just the way we have to operate within the intergovernmental system. And today, I think we're going to pull some threads together from the first 3 sessions, and I'm excited because Jeff has said we're going to meander through this course, which means that we're going to go carefully and safely through a lot of material and come out on the other side a little smarter. But when I thought about that word meandering, I realized that sometimes you have to sort of slow down and take in the scenery. And when you go across New York, it's just a beautiful time of the year to do a little meandering, whether it's on the rivers or the highways. There's so much great territory, and we hope that we've got a good cross-section of our participants who will jump in at some point if you have a question or if there's something that's not clear. Please let Matt know. And I'll be less of an interruption this time, Jeff. I think you've got a great program lined up for us. Maybe there'll be a point where I can jump in and add something or a question that maybe the audience has on its mind as well. But it's once again time to jump to the starting point and let you take it from here. So thanks again, Jeff, and again, Matt, thanks for getting us here.
Thank you very much. Jump in anytime you want. Same with everybody else who's online. Jump in whenever, if you have anything that you want to ask, if you have anything that you want to add to the discussion that I missed, by all means, please jump in. For those of you who've been attending, and I see that most of the attendees have been our faithful followers, to help put things in a little bit in perspective. In the first 2 webinars, we were focusing on building the case for why you should have a risk management program. We introduced you to the concept of risk management. We talked about how a program can benefit you. It wasn't until the 3rd webinar that we showed you that there's actually a method to the madness, that first you need to identify and inventory your risk. After you do that, you then have to prioritize it. And the prioritizing was put into the context of the total cost of risk as opposed to just looking at that moment in time. And then finally what we did was we gave you tools or showed you how the 4 tools are used to handle risk. We're talking either upside risk or downside risk. The tools get used for both in the same fashion. This next webinar, the webinar that we're about to commence, is one designed to actually hand you the program. It's kind of tough. We have participants who have 150 students in their entire district. We have some that have as many as 15, 20,000, 30,000 students in their district. One size never fits all. And as I was, I'm trying to stay one webinar ahead of everybody as far as the design. So it was rather interesting. At the end of the last webinar, I received a LinkedIn invitation from one of the participants that threw the following question at me. Thank you for your insights. What bothers me is that you bring the, quote, big city approach, close quote, to risk management, complete with big city budgets. My district is not quite 4,500 students, probably just about enough to fill 2 of your schools in Philadelphia. Can your program really exist in my little corner of the world? Can we here in Smallville afford your big dreams? My immediate answer was flipping and say, could you afford to not have these dreams? And that seems a little bit too pat of an answer. The conversation I had with the woman over the next 2 days really fills in the spaces in this presentation. So I want to move right into the presentation at this point, and hopefully I won't have the same technical issues as last time. Let's see. There we are. So we've got our 8 points on helping others. And again, the whole process that we're looking at right now is putting into your hands a program that you can then put into the hands of your district. To start with, you want to have a risk management structure. The structure consists of 4 points, and all 4 points are looking at data. The reason why is in risk management, that which is not measured does not get addressed. So first you want to be able to collect the data. You want to be able to analyze the data. From there you start developing your programs, and you have to be able to communicate, both telling people what you expect of them and also hearing from them what's really their big concerns. They're the drivers of the program, surprisingly, not us at the top. In the first or second webinar, I gave you this wonderful model of a risk management structure created by Deloitte. And both Lee and I sang its praises ad nauseum. We still believe in it. The problem is this isn't something that you can hold in your hand. This isn't something that really can make it work. This is the theory. The practice of setting up a risk management structure is classic. It's your linear model. The superintendent and the board of directors communicate to each other. The superintendent and the CBO, or if you are, as the CBO, you are an assistant superintendent or deputy superintendent, communicate with each other. They then communicate with the risk manager. You know, to put the risk manager to stand out because I've got an incredible ego. And then the risk manager's job is to work with the risk management committee and with the side committees. And I'm going to go into that in a little while. But going back to the woman who wrote me and said, you know, she's from Smallville. They can't afford a risk manager. Most of the people, most of the school districts have troubles until they hit about 30,000. You have troubles being able to afford a risk manager. So at the risk of insulting my colleagues, your model is get rid of the risk manager. Don't get rid of risk management. Don't get rid of the risk management program. Get rid of the risk manager. Make your risk management committee the risk managers. Your risk management committee is the head of facilities, the head of transportation, the head of food service, your principals, nurses, security. You have them all sitting in a room and all discussing the issues of risk. Those three committees off to the side, those are your critical committees. Those are the committees that are going to ensure that your school is truly risk intelligent. The safety committee looks at day-to-day issues. They're the ones who look at things such as the fire system hasn't been tested or the sprinkler system hasn't been tested, that snow doesn't get removed in a timely fashion, that we have people walking through the school that aren't students, that aren't administration or teachers or employees. They're your daily eyes and ears. They have regular meetings, they have training, they have a formal agenda. These are the people who are empowered to create the programs or to get the programs up and running. But you really do need two other committees. A quick thought for you. It's right now about coming up on 3 o'clock on Thursday. I want you to picture that this is the Thursday before your school district is opening for the year. Your school district opens on Tuesday. Your superintendent rings the bell, traditional ringing of the bell, to open up the school year. And right about now, somebody walks into your office and says that it's just been determined that one of your schools has a mold problem that is so bad that they have to close the school. They're going to have to tear out the walls. They're going to have to tear out the air exchange system. They're going to have to clean everything and then put in new walls. The question is, would you be able to ring that bell on Tuesday and know that every student has a seat in a school? It's not a hypothetical question. It happened at Overbrooks High School in Philadelphia. At about 3 o'clock on the Thursday before school was to open, they got notified that the school can't be opened. Philadelphia does one thing very well, and that is their continuity model. They were able to have buses for all the kids, seats for all the kids, in another school with food service. Everything was lined up. The question is, if you have 5 schools, if you have 10 schools in your district, would you be able to do it? When I've spoken to my colleagues about it, and I say, you know, you have some places that only have 2 schools in their entire district, their answer is very naive. They say, well, gosh, if it's that small, you should be able to find space elsewhere. No, the community is so small, there is no space. What have you done for business continuity? It doesn't matter if it's mold, if there's a fire, if, as unfortunately something happened in one of our districts in New York, the school was hit with a tornado that dropped out the walls. Do you have a crisis management team? Do you have a business continuity team? These are the critical teams that you should be looking at. You should have facilities involved. You should have food service, transportation, safety. They should be meeting regularly. That's the risk management structure that you want to put together. The second is probably the shortest part of the presentation, communications. Please don't misunderstand short with lack of importance. Communications is what this is all about. If you notice, I've changed the model again. It's no longer a linear model. For most of you, you're dealing with 10 schools, 15 schools at most. In many cases, you're dealing with 3 schools, 5 schools, 6 schools. Your community is small enough that the custodians' kids are probably in school in your school district, that the principal's kids are in the school district. You don't need that linear model. Everyone can actually meet with each other. Everyone can talk to each other. And that's why this model is a much better model. It's a rather simple model. It starts off with the board of directors. developing and disseminating policy. At your level, you're implementing those policies, but you're doing it by establishing goals and expectations. That's the most important thing that you can do for the system. That's the most important thing you can do in the process, is to establish goals and expectations for everybody. It then drops down to that risk management committee. Again, remember the committee is your facility manager. The facility manager starts implementing the program. Your principals are implementing their part of the program. At the same time, they see what's going right and what's going wrong in the process. They're your eyes and ears. They are making recommendations to you. We're going to be talking in a little while about the process of making recommendations. And part of that making recommendations is they need to be able to come to you and support their recommendations. They have to be their own best advocate. And it's based on data. We're data-driven in risk management, again. So they need to learn how to gather the data that you need, and they need to learn how to make recommendations based on that data. You then use the data to develop new programs and also to advise the board of directors. And in return, they then try to improve on the policies. In our last session, we talked about how to prioritize risk. Years ago, I had a secretary who I had said, how was your weekend? I said, oh, great. We planted the garden, and we attended a car wash, and my dad had a massive heart attack. And she just kept going on, and it's like, wait a second. Did I just hear you right? And that just landed up in the middle of everything, and I was like, this woman really is not very good at prioritizing her life, it seems. You'll find that people may be very good at what they do. The transportation person may be the best in the game. The facility person may be able to listen to their building. Just by the tone of the building, they know what's going on. But prioritizing their issues isn't a natural thing for people. You'd be surprised to find out. In the last presentation, I spoke to you about developing the risk inventory of risk issues, the frequency, the severity, and we plugged in numbers. And I felt a little guilty because I really glossed over those numbers by just saying to you, as long as there's a consistency that between those numbers, you're okay. It's a bit of a lie, so I do apologize for lying to you. There's really a very specific method to it. You have the risk management committee. That's the structure. That was step one. On it, you have your facilities manager, you have your food services, you have your transportation. What happens is you meet with each of the members of the committee. You meet with the principals and say to them, I'd like you to list the top 10 or top 20 problems that you have or hazards that you feel the system is being exposed to. Also say to them, what are your top 10 goals? What are your top 10 opportunities that you wish you could take advantage of? And they'll come up with a list like the one that you see here. Once you do that, this is where you're going to start teaching a committee how to function properly, how to prioritize, how to analyze. So let's say, for instance, the facility manager. The list that they came up with, and we're not going to go through the entire list. You wouldn't go through the entire list at the front point with the facilities manager. If you take, let's say, his first point, staffing. You start asking him, what is it about staffing that made you put this on the list? It forces them to have to think about it, but they come up with, well, I'm worried about, do I have the right amount of staffing? You start asking questions. Do we have any legal requirements? For instance, are we required to have a person with a boiler's license on premises at all times? Are we required to have someone with an electrical license or a plumbing license in the district? Once you know what your legal requirements are, your union requirements, you tell them, look at the building and start thinking about, do we have enough people for the size of the building, the age of the building? If you're a BOSI, your requirements are different than if you're a high school. If you're a high school, it's different than a technical high school or a grade school. You get your facility manager to start thinking about these things. You find out that one of the other issues, and as far as the time study, we'll talk about that in a little while, but you start finding out that he's worried about staffing needs coming up due to retirement. You start finding out that there's staffing requirements that arise from having preventable accidents. Once you understand that, once you can get him or her to articulate these issues, you can then start talking about how do you address these issues. Now, if you notice, as we start looking at the temp and perm replacement workers for workers' compensation injuries, we now are starting to talk about the safety issues as well. Once that happens, the next step in the process that you are teaching is you say, okay, let's look at your loss analysis. Let's figure out what's happening here. You can start looking at the accidents. That's where your safety committee comes in. That's where the data is being collected. You may have a TPA. You may have a management company. Whatever it is, your safety committee can start looking at the accidents and trying to understand the accidents. Also understanding near loss events. Once you have your risk management committee or the specific person on that committee thinking, they can start looking at what are my most frequent accidents, what are my most expensive ones, what accidents result in me losing either key people or for the longest time period. You start looking at things like age and gender, because when I was 23 years old and picked up a box of paper and pulled out my back, I was back up and doing sports in a week. At 53 years old, it's going to be probably 2 months for that same injury. Once your risk committee is thinking in these terms, they are now giving you data and they are now giving you recommendations. That's what the committee is supposed to be doing, and this is how they're going to be doing it. This allows you to establish the goals and expectations. You also get a better understanding of your budgeting. You get a better understanding of what training and tools are needed. They are giving you the data. They are giving you the recommendations that will allow you to make better decisions. Number 4 on an essential practice is establishing expectations. First thing is keep them achievable. If nothing else, set your standards for a lower level. You can always update your standards as they get achieved. But set your expectations so that everybody knows what their job is supposed to be. Now, I realize I'm talking to numbers people, and I don't mean this as an insult, but whenever I deal with the process, I end up getting told that the processes are all well and good, the results are what matters. And the reason why is when you are presenting a budget to your finance source, be it the legislature, be it the community, you have to say, I'm budgeting X amount of money for Y, X amount of money for Z. You can't put in that little space in the Excel sheet process. You have to put in a number. I understand that, but the part that risk management stops to look at is that while processes or outcomes are good, processes are better. Let me give you an example. Let me demonstrate what happens. Snow and ice claims. As you look at these numbers, it probably tells you that there's not a whole lot of consistency in the program. The dollar amount seems to run fairly close to the number of claims. It seems to be a consistent amount of money per claim year over year. So if you look at these numbers, you may say, well, gosh, in 07 to 08, I came down. Perhaps in 09, I'm going to do better. You may be looking at it saying, well, we go high, low, high, low. The next year, I better think in terms of high. Whatever it is, in 2008, at the end of 2008, your risk manager leaves. You get a new risk manager. And in 09 and in 10, the numbers come down in a very nice pattern. You start saying, I'm glad I got rid of that first risk manager. The second risk manager is great. Here are my numbers, and numbers are good. Well, you're measuring the wrong numbers with all due respect. If you added in some extra numbers, you would have seen that the number of days of precipitation had dropped during those 2 years. The temperatures, the average temperatures, had gone up over the same 2 years. Less water hitting the ground, less water freezing. Of course you're going to have, you should at least, have lower claims. Then 2011 hits. You have more wet coming onto the ground. You have more wet freezing to the ground. And now this is your numbers. Where you may have been thinking after 2010, I may only need about $23,000 for my claims, maybe even less. You're now looking at more than double. Your budget got blown. And as you start pulling those numbers apart, you start realizing that this new risk manager isn't controlling anything, that the number of claims per day of precipitation is up, the cost per claim is up. You had no process. You had numbers. If you had somebody who was looking at the process, they could have said, well, when we hear that there's going to be wet weather, how do we deal with it? That's a risk management program. If the person is saying, well, when somebody gets hurt, this is how we will deal with the injury, that's a claims management program, not a risk management program. The difference is risk management is proactive. Claims management is reactive. That's why I keep going back to, if you have a good process, you will have good numbers. Number 5 really is the core of the risk management program. Again, we're talking about the 8 essential practices. Our job as school officials is to educate students. That is our core mission. To me, the way you do that is we all are making a commitment to our students. There's 3 hard and fast rules. First, when a parent gives us their child, they're exercising the ultimate act of trust and faith. I don't know how many of you who are listening right now have young children in school. I don't know how many of you have older kids that may have forgotten this. But I remember I put my son into daycare when he was 3.5 months old. And I went out to my car and I just sat there thinking to myself that if somebody does something wrong to my child, he can't express himself. And I became very, very concerned about the fact, am I making the right decision? And I had to finally accept the fact that I'm going to have to trust the decision I made and trust the organization that I'm giving my son to. It doesn't change when your kids get into high school. You now are putting your trust and your faith in the system to make sure that my kid is not going to get bullied, that my son is not going to get, or my daughter is not going to get pressured into drugs or pressured into personal relationships that are bad. We never give up our trust and our faith in the system. We have to remember this. Every child has the right to feel safe in school. Learning can only take place when a child does feel safe in the school. Once we understand that, we now can move our risk management program to the core purpose. A moment for a breather for you. What do you think the 5 most frequent school injuries are, or school-related injuries? As I show these to you, I'm going to tell you right up front I disagree with them. I'll tell you why in a moment, though. According to the Michigan State University newsletter that was later reproduced in the Michigan Federation of Teachers and School-Related Personnel Report of 2005, science labs were number 5. At number 4, industrial arts. Gym class is number 3. Playgrounds, number 2. And the number 1 cause, trips and fall injuries. I'm not sure exactly how that becomes meaningful because it's such a broad category. I have a problem with these numbers, though. And the reason I have the problem with the numbers, take a moment and remember that I'm pointing out gym class, 12%. We're going to come back to that in a moment. These numbers do not address the following points. They don't talk about school bus-related injuries, non-gym-related sports injuries, your sports clubs, your sports teams. And it doesn't address student-on-student violence. All the numbers that you saw before equaled over 90%. These 3 issues do not equal up to 10% according to that study. So does that study have validity? Yes, it does. It was in 2005 before measuring student-on-student violence was taking place. The other thing is the way the system is set up. It's a national system or a statewide system. They don't refine it. So a school bus injury could be that somebody fell off the school bus, that somebody, if they got hit by a bus or hit by a car, it may have been classified as a slip, trip, and fall situation. So let me give you some other numbers to think about. Let's talk about school bus-related injuries. In 2002, nationally, 26 children aged 14 and under were killed in bus-related accidents. 11 of those children were pedestrians. In other words, they were coming across the street to get into the bus, or they had just gotten off the bus and were walking out when they got hit, or they got hit by the bus itself. In 2001, 4,500 students were injured in school bus-related injuries. 90% of those were students inside the bus. That means that 450 students were hurt in school bus-related injuries outside the bus. It means they got hit by a car or hit by the bus, but didn't die. These are numbers that should be very disturbing. Actually, before I jump to that one, I do apologize. It means that we know that the problem is there. And even if your school district is a school district with 300 or 1,000 kids, and you don't have that many buses, you need to think about, just because it's not showing up on your radar, you know that this is an issue. There are very simple ways of eliminating a number of bus injuries or bus-related injuries. For instance, you have all the buses roll out at the same time. So that way kids aren't going to be as inclined to darting between the buses. You have teachers, you have administrators standing along the line of the buses to make sure there's no dart-throughs. And that has been shown to eliminate an incredible amount of injuries. Had you seen the only, excuse me, let me state that again. Had you only seen the top 5 list, this would have never shown up on your radar. Non-gym related sports injuries. Gym class has fewer injuries per 1,000 students than organized sports through the school. That would be your sports clubs and your sports teams. 1 out of every 4 baseball players will get hurt during the season. Nearly 1 out of every 3 football players will get hurt during the season. And this doesn't show up in the top 5. I trust that most of the school districts that I'm speaking to right now have some organized sports club or sports team. These numbers should make you start thinking, but where do these numbers really come from? If you read the report, you'll find out that the majority of the injuries that are shown here happen during practice, happen during training. They don't happen during the big game. That means that you now have the numbers, you now have the knowledge, you can build the program. Who's going to build the program? Your risk management committee. Who? The athletic director, who's sitting on the risk management committee, now has an understanding, how do I go about figuring out where the injuries are going to happen, how the injuries are going to happen, and they can address it and report back to you and make recommendations back to you based on data. Very simple. What else is there to say? Now, as far as preventable injuries, this goes back to what's called root cause analysis. This is something that your risk committees need to learn about. They need to stop and look at not just for injuries that are preventable, but they need to look at root causes for, let's say, building damage. The reason that we had a leak isn't because the roof went bad. The reason why was because we didn't have somebody to inspect the roof, or we didn't have a process for recording and addressing it. But this tells you the story of why your risk committee becomes valuable. Because 80 to 90% or 95% of all injuries could have been prevented. 13,000 playground equipped related injuries happen every year in a school setting. 70% involve falls, falling off the swing, falling off the merry-go-round, falling off the jungle gym, falling from the sliding board. 10% involve falling into or onto equipment, such as walking in front of the swing while somebody's on it. The most upsetting part of this is that 40% of the injuries were due to lack of supervision, and that's a higher number than the city park with the same equipment or in child care centers. We can do better, but it takes a committee to figure it out, to look at numbers, and to make recommendations on how we can address these issues. A lot of them are simple, no-cost or low-cost answers. And if you empower your committees, they will come up with it for you because they see it every day. They know when crowding takes place. They know that there are rules that can be set up and what happens if rules are broken. They're your eyes, they're your ears. Making a commitment to your students and not making a commitment to your employees will ensure that the program will not work. There's two simple rules here. Every employee wants to believe that he or she makes a difference for the organization. I don't care how jaded your employees are. Nobody wants to go to work each day, sit, and then go home and feel like I've wasted another day of my life. Let's cross off another day on the calendar. I'm waiting for my checks to die. Nobody's in that state of mind, or not a normal, healthy person. Every employee wants to return home at the end of the workday in the same condition that they were in when they arrived. When you accept these two rules, when you acknowledge this, you now have an employee that is that's more valuable than you stop to realize. They are your risk committee. Empower them. Give them the tools. Give them a voice. Make them realize that they truly are necessary. As for tools, there's structure, there's equipment, and there's training. The structure, again, I'm going back to the safety committees. I cannot overemphasize those. But if you remember the structure that we had set up, where it's really a very tight-knit system as opposed to a linear system, if somebody sees something, you need to let them know. If you can't get to the person that needs to know it, go above them. Get the word out that we need to have good, effective lines of communication. Safety equipment is quite obvious, of course, and so is training. As you listen to the committees will either say we need some more training in a certain topic, or we're worried about this topic, and then you can say, well, how can we train you to do it better? But the tools are obvious. The voice. Your safety committee has to have a voice. If it's a safety committee at the school level, and that's why I recommend having safety committees, so that way they can address the issues of their unique school. The issues of a high school are not the same as the issues in a grade school. Excuse me. There's no sense in having a safety committee if they are not being trained to do their job well, and if no one's listening to them. Now, this slide is a little bit deceiving. That I talk about that the safety committee is looking at hazards or downside risks, and teachers and departments are looking at opportunity or upside risk. No, what I'm saying is that don't just look at the hazards. Look for opportunities. That's what the voice is, giving them an opportunity to find a way to improve their schools. Student councils giving a voice on issues of safety. This was rather controversial. As I was trying to develop risk or safety committees in my schools and getting a lot of pushback on that, at the same time I was proposing giving student council. Actually, I just noticed it should be council, C-O-N-C-I-L. I apologize. But they should be empowered too. The truth of the matter is that your students have a better understanding of some of the risks, such as people coming in through the back door, drug problems, kids being afraid of bully situations that the administration may not know. Your student council is a point that can really improve the quality of safety and also help you to identify opportunities. Don't discount them or disregard them, especially at a high school level or maybe even a middle school level. Number 7, invest in the future. This one is probably the toughest because this is the one where you have to sell risk management to the larger community. But the reality is, if you are setting up a practice, a risk practice, a risk management ethos, you need to think about the future. Otherwise, all you're going to do is you'll constantly pick the low-hanging fruit until there isn't any low-hanging fruit. You'll keep doing the quick fixes and wasting money on Band-Aids instead of getting treatment. You need to stop and think, where are my expensive risks? What are my key assets? You want to protect your key assets, your buildings and contents, your personnel, your students, and your reputation. That seems to get forgotten too often, but your reputation is one of the big risk issues for any organization. I don't care if it's an international corporation or if it's a school district with 300 kids. Your reputation is everything. How do you protect them? Building and contents, the classic is insurance. Insurance is not how you protect a building. Insurance does not stop the building from burning down. Insurance does not stop the pipes from bursting. Insurance addresses the issue if the pipes burst. But again, if you have mold in your building and you have to close down your building, that may not be covered by insurance. And in fact, at the school district of Philadelphia, they had to gut that whole school without any benefit of insurance. Insurance is not the answer. For building and contents, how do you protect your key assets? Annual inspections of both the structure, you're checking the foundation, you're checking the roof, and of the systems. Electrical fires are a prime issue in older school buildings. When was the last time that you checked that you had a thermographic inspection of your system? Cameras and central reporting stations. Central reporting stations for fire, for theft, for water, so that if somebody breaks into the building, if there's smoke or if there's fire on a weekend or in the middle of the night, they'll send off a signal to the local fire department, police department, or a monitoring station so that they can get a response in a timely fashion. Cameras. One of the big problems with cameras are how ineffective they've become. You set up 40 cameras in your school, 50 cameras in your school, you put one person in a room to watch a television monitor that's broken into 4 segments, 8 segments, and very quickly they glaze over, they stop watching the cameras. What's the sense? If you have cameras focused, and your safety people or your police will tell you, if you have cameras focused at your doors, and if a door is opened other than your one access door, or perhaps your one access door and the door for deliveries, but whenever a door opens up, the camera takes priority. It sets off a red light on the monitor saying that door was opened, and that's the camera that takes over the whole space so that you can see, do we have a problem? Fire suppression systems. This is truly investing in the future because the cost of a fire suppression system can be very expensive. In new construction, it's going to cost you $1 or $2 per square foot. In a retrofit, it starts at $2 and goes up to about $7. So if you're looking at a 2-story high school, you could be looking at $1 million investment to retrofit the school. That's a tough sell in these days, especially if you have a smaller school district. That's a really tough sell. If you have a bigger one, it's tough because which schools are you going to invest in? Well, fire suppression systems are going to lower your losses by 80%. Your fire system should last you 25 years. $1 million to ensure that for the next 25 years, our school will be standing. It's not going to stop the fire from happening. It's going to stop the fire from creating the damage that's possible. If you do have a fire and it does destroy your building, you're looking at $6 to $10 to clean up the debris and demolition. If there happens to be asbestos in the building or lead in the building, it's $10 to $18. And if your school is destroyed, you better have insurance because that same school is going to cost you between $19 million and $41 million to rebuild. That's why I'm saying that you want to invest in the future because the money that you're going to spend, and I know it's hard to convince the community of this. I know. I had to build a school when I was in office, and it's a tough sell. But this is what risk management is about, looking at the long term. Protecting your students. Metal detectors to keep weapons out. Do we wait until, God forbid, we have a Columbine or a Newtown? You have to remember, Columbine was 24,000 students. Newtown was 20,000 students. We have that within our system. At least one person who's on the line right now has broken that limit. Does it mean that we can't have that happen in a school of 10,000 or 5,000? When do we make the decision to put those into our schools? How about recreating access to your schools so that way you know that they're only coming in through one way and that it's controlled, very tightly controlled? Cameras, of course, tracking IDs, and also stranger danger education, really bumping up the stranger danger education so that people know that, yes, we have a safe school, but it doesn't mean you should lower your guard. The last issue for creating a risk management program is encouraging risk-taking. In the other 7, we've been looking at both upside and downside risk. I've been leaning a lot on the downside of risk. I haven't really been pushing the upside of risk. And that's unfortunate because a risk management program really, really needs to encourage risk-taking. We're going to be talking a lot about that in the next presentation. But encouraging risk-taking is truly encouraging greatness. It's very simple. Risk management says that you have an idea. I want to change the way I teach something. I want to take the kids, instead of teaching them about World War II, I want to take them to the to the Battleship Cove up in Massachusetts, or the Battleship New Jersey down in Camden, New Jersey. That's my idea. Well, I shouldn't just say I want to do it. When somebody has the idea, say to them, it sounds like a great idea. Let's develop the idea. Let's look at it. Or I think the time has come for us to have a basketball team or a football team. We haven't had one, but I think we should support one now. Great idea. Justify it. Tell me the upside risk. Tell me the value of the program. Develop a case for me. Once you see that, and by the way, you can set this up on a form. How would you increase the chances of the success? We may only get one bite of the apple. The community may not support us for long. We got to make it work right away. How would you increase the success? How would you measure the program? You want to teach math a different way. How would you measure it to make sure it's effective? And then what are the exposures? What are the downside risks, the hazards, that can make this idea fail? You start requiring that people think about this. Think about the process. Take the idea and turn it into a process. It's rather simple as you look at it, until you start adding some of the detail. And then it starts to get a little frightening, but it's not. This is a process that is being repeated over and over. The idea, you start off by saying, justify the idea. Give me the upside evaluation. And as I taught on the last seminar, it starts off in each of those sectors, except for the blue sector, which is your measurement sector. In each of the sectors, you're starting off by identifying the risk. You're inventorying the risk. It's an upside risk in all cases, in the green case, excuse me. In the purple, you're looking at both the upside and the downside risk. And then in the orange, you're looking at just the downside risk. But it's the same step in each one of those spheres. Once you've identified or inventoried it, now you're quantifying it. We've already discussed how to quantify it. And in each of the sectors, again, that's all you're doing is the second step, quantifying it. And then your action plan. How do you make it happen? Again, in each of the sectors, it's the same process. The only difference has been you want to keep measuring it. That which does not get measured does not get addressed. If we know that we're having success, but we can improve on that success, this is where it shows up. So at this point, I hope that I've been able to give you a risk management program that you could roll out, that you could say, let's start putting it together. We now have our pieces. Let's start getting people into the seats. You now know what seats need to be around the table, and you know the types of conversations that need to take place. As the business officer, you are used to doing business plans, but not everybody else is. You really are teaching them that skill that you already know. They know the facilities. They know the transportation or the food service aspect. You can teach them the rest of the analysis, and they become your eyes and your ears, not merely the hands that are implementing it for you. So at this point, I would love to open it up if anybody has any questions on actually setting up and getting your program running. One question I have is, through this process, has anybody moved closer to saying, yes, the time has come, let's get this moving. Let's get a risk management program up and running, a formal risk management program? Anybody?
If anyone would like to answer, go ahead and just type it into the chat screen and we can take a look.
And because hopefully at this point, at your next staff meeting, you're able to say, we can do better by doing something that we may already be doing, but now what we're doing is we're going to do it in a very formal fashion, so that way we can get the most mileage out of the process. Instead of having it be a hit and miss, we will have it in a very organized fashion. Again, it goes back to the structure issue.
Do you have anyone with their hand raised that wants to have a question on the open line? Because I see there may be someone with an unanswered question who may be trying to get on.
Nope, I don't have anyone with a raised hand, and I have no questions in the queue.
Okay.
Well, I see one has an unanswered question, but they may, I don't know how that works.
Maybe we can address that separately.
By the way, if anybody has any questions afterwards, if you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me, and I would be more than happy to help you address these issues or talk to you about your specific concerns, how to get something moving forward. A lot of times the toughest part of setting up the program is getting that initial step, because that's where you need to get the buy-in. I hate the phrase low-hanging fruit. It's become so cliche these days, but realistically, the one thing that even the risk management community talks about is that you want to have quick successes, so that way you can build on your successes. And so as you set up a risk committee, start giving them tasks that can be accomplished rather quickly so that they can see the positive effects of the system.
And Jeff, isn't that part of what we'll be talking about in the fifth part of this series, is turning risk into reward and finding those ways to be successful when it seems like there's hard to get started sometimes. As I think about what you said today, it reminds me of the term systems thinking, and you pull together a lot of those thoughts in these 8 essentials today. Maybe something that's unnatural to us at first can become more natural as we work together on this. I don't see any questions. Matt, do you want to stay with this a little bit longer? Do you think we're at that point where maybe the audience is still thinking about something they want to ask us?
I'm here as long as the audience needs us to be here.
If anyone has
any questions, go ahead and hit the raise your hand button. We can put you through to Jeff or Lee. You can type in the chat screen, or you can type in the ask a question screen, and Jeff and Lee will get right to your question.
And I think those who are interested in the next session we're on for next Wednesday, is that correct? Or are we back on Thursday? Can you remind me, Matt?
We're Wednesday, October 2nd.
Yep.
For the final webinar. And what we're going to be talking about in that is also understanding more, emphasizing more about the upside risk and how we're going to be able to use, now that we understand risk and understand the risk committee process and the risk analysis process, how do we start looking at risk being a good thing? Again, we started off this process by asking everybody, what is your definition of risk? And chances are everybody had hazard or loss within their understanding of risk. And over time, we've been showing how risk is also opportunity. And just as you would be very formal about how are we going to address the snowstorm, how are we going to address the bullying issue, we use that same formal process, the exact same formal process, to how do we find out what grants are out there? How do we exploit the opportunities to get grants from the state or from the federal system? Those are risks. They're upside risks, and the process is the same. So I'm looking at, as we move into the final phase of this, talking about using the risk management structure and risk management tools to take advantage of opportunities that are out there.
And Jeff, just to add to that, the purpose is to make sure that school business officials feel that there is a reward to all this, that there's a benefit in taking this extra step and putting this all together. Is that correct?
Yes. One of the problems is, I think I may have mentioned this somewhere along the way, that in my school district, I went through 5 CEOs in a very short time period, including a couple temporary CEOs. And each one that came in took the microphone, and each one used the exact same phrase, not realizing the prior CEO or CEOs had used it, that we are looking at a cultural change. This marks a cultural change. And everybody heard that phrase and understood it to mean I've got more assignments for the same amount of work. I've got more requirements for the same amount of time per day. And hopefully, as the business administrator, as the top business official or in the business office, by being able to say to people, risk management also means risk opportunity, taking advantage of these moments, figuring out how do we get more grants, figuring out how do we field another sports team. This will help people to understand risk not as another assignment, but just part of the nature of what they do in a school setting.
Matt, I think we've enjoyed this afternoon, and I hope we've hit the mark for you today. And ASBO, if there's anything else we can do, we'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Lee, and thank you, Jeff. Last call for questions, and if you want to ask a question, please do so now. You can hit the raise hand button on your GoToWebinar control panel. You can type a question in the chat, or you can use the question pane if you'd like to. We'll stick around for another minute or so, and then we'll have you on your way. Our next webinar, like Jeff said, is Wednesday, October 2nd at 2:30 p.m. We'll give you a moment to go ahead and type in your questions.
Matthew, also I want to thank you, and I want to thank Lee for all the help on putting this one together along with the others. It's been, I think the success of these are due to the two of you giving so much of yourselves to make this happen. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jeff. All right, we have no questions, so we're going to end that here. Gentlemen, thank you, and thank you everyone for attending.